Chapter 1. The madness inside my head didn't just whisper, it screamed, clawed, and demanded blood. I ran through the freezing woods because the biting cold was the only thing that could dull the fire in my veins. The thick snow crunched under my heavy leather boots. The freezing winter wind whipped against my scarred face, stinging my skin, freezing my breath, and numbing my bare hands. Groan. I could still hear the terrifying echoes of my last curse-driven rage. I remembered the broken bones of my own beta, the dark blood on my claws, and the pure terror in his eyes when I didn't recognize him. Have you ever felt your own mind turn into a cage of wild beasts? It hurts, it destroys, it isolates. Without warning, a sharp pain shot straight through the ancient hunter's brand on my chest. The ugly, jagged scar burned like liquid silver. I stumbled against a frozen oak tree, gasping for air as my lungs collapsed. My vision blurred into a deep, bloody red. Frantic whisper. Not now. Please, not now. I needed to stay conscious. If I lost control out here in the dark, I would slaughter anything that crossed my path. In that moment, the hallucination started again. I saw phantom hunters with dark iron chains emerging from the thick shadows of the pines. They laughed. They mocked my agony. They wanted to see me broken. They wanted to see me crawl. That's why I hated myself so deeply. I was the alpha of the Obsidian Peaks, a leader who was supposed to be a shield, a protector, and a king for his people. Instead, I was a ticking time bomb. I was a monster waiting to snap. Why did the royal hunters curse me with this terrible mind rot years ago? What dark secret were they trying to protect? They stole my past, and they left me with a fractured soul that I still cannot mend. As the silence roared around me, the wind suddenly shifted. A new scent cut right through the heavy smell of pine and crisp snow. It wasn't the metallic tang of blood. It wasn't the musk of a rogue shifter. In fact, it was something completely pure. It smelled like winter starlight, clean rain, and sweet morning dew. Just like that, the phantom voices in my skull went quiet for a single second. It was a scent that didn't belong in a place this dark. It felt like a warm blanket on a freezing night. My wolf pushed forward against my ribcage, sniffing the air with an intense, desperate hunger. Because of that, my legs moved without my permission. I didn't think about the pain or the freezing cold anymore. I followed the intoxicating scent down the mountain slope, moving like a shadow toward the lawless border town below. The bright lights of a dirty, dangerous tavern flickered in the distance through the trees. The madness inside me rumbled, but the sweet starlight scent kept pulling me closer to the edge of the woods. Soon after, I stepped into the clearing, my eyes locked onto the glowing windows of the tavern, knowing my fate was waiting inside. Chapter 2. The Tavern Brawl. Moments later, I kicked open the heavy oak door of the Copper Cauldron Tavern. The loud noise of shouting men, clinking glasses, and rough laughter stopped for a brief second. The air inside was thick. It smelled of cheap ale, sweat, and burning wood. I kept my hood pulled low over my face because I didn't want the local dregs to recognize my alpha features. My eyes scanned the room, searching for Silas, a dangerous rogue who had stolen a secret royal map from the hunters. That map was an open loop I needed to close. It held the locations of the hunters' hidden prisons, and I needed it to free my captured wolves. Next, I spotted him in the back corner, drinking with 3 large, scarred brutes. I walked through the crowded room, my boots thudding heavily against the floorboards. Silas saw me approaching, and his eyes widened with instant panic. He slammed his glass down and reached for his silver blade. Without thinking, I lunged forward, a blur of fur and fury. I slammed my fist into the first brute's jaw because he dared to stand between me and my answers. The man flew backward, crashing through a wooden table. Splinters exploded everywhere. What followed was total chaotic madness. The entire tavern erupted into a blood-soaked brawl. Chairs were thrown, fists flew, shifters flashed their fangs. I tore through the fighters like a whirlwind, my claws extending as the darkness in my mind tried to take the wheel again. The static in my brain started to roar, louder and louder, threatening to drown out my sanity. Growl. "Get out of my way!" I grabbed Silas by his throat, lifting him off his feet. "Where is the map?" I roared, my voice vibrating the glasses on the bar. He choked, clawing at my iron grip. To make things worse, the red haze returned to my vision, wiping away my logic. I wasn't just interrogating him anymore. The curse was taking over. I wanted to tear him apart. I wanted to paint the walls with his blood. Still, Silas managed to gasp out his final words. "The hunters, they already know. They are coming for her." Before I could ask who her was, a heavy wooden stool smashed against my back. It didn't hurt, but it snapped the last thread of my control. I let go of Silas and turned around, completely blind with rage. I bared my fangs, a terrifying sound ripping from my chest. I was ready to slaughter every single soul in this room. The innocent patrons screamed, scrambling toward the exit as I stepped forward as a monster. But then, the chaotic crowd shifted, pushing a slight hooded figure directly into my path of destruction. Chapter 3. The silence. In that moment, the universe seemed to stop spinning. The slight figure tripped over a broken chair leg, tumbling forward. Without another word, she crashed straight into my chest. The moment their eyes locked, time stood still. Our skin connected through her ripped sleeve, and a violent shockwave of pure energy shot through my veins. It was like lightning, but it didn't burn. It was magic, warm, bright, and impossibly powerful. Between one breath and the next, the roaring static in my mind cut to dead silence. The heavy red haze vanished from my eyes. The phantom voices died. The constant, agonizing pressure in my skull simply disappeared. I froze, my hands hanging in the air, staring down at the girl in absolute shock. I felt it, clear as day. Her magic was weaving the shattered pieces of my mind back together like a mystical loom. I opened my mouth, but before the words left my lips, I noticed her eyes. They were a stunning, wide silver, shining with a secret power that didn't belong to any normal wolf. Deep down, I knew the truth. This girl wasn't ordinary. My chest brand flared with a strange, golden warmth, reacting to her very existence. Who was she? Why did her touch cure the curse that had tortured me for a decade? That was a beautiful mystery, a question that haunted my soul instantly. As the silence stretched between us, she looked up at my fangs, her breath catching in her throat. Her body trembled, but I didn't see fear in her eyes. Instead, I saw a quiet, unbreakable defiance that fascinated me. She was a tiny bird staring down an apex predator, refusing to blink. But then she realized what her magic had done. She gasped, her silver eyes darting to the tavern door. Before I could move, she ripped herself away from my grip. The loss of her touch felt like a physical blow to my chest. The cold air rushed between us, and a tiny hint of the static threatened to creep back into my brain. Desperate whisper. No. Come back. I couldn't let her go because her touch was the only thing keeping the darkness away. She was my anchor, my salvation, my cure. Yet, she didn't want to be found. She pulled her hood over her head, turned on her heel, and bolted out into the raging blizzard. I stood in the ruined tavern, surrounded by groaning men and broken furniture, but my world narrowed down to her disappearing scent. She was running into the freezing night, entirely unaware that she had just bound her destiny to a desperate alpha. I gripped my fists, my wolf howling inside my mind, ready to hunt her down across the ends of the earth. Chapter 4. The Alleyway Corner. The freezing wind howled through the dark alleyways like a dying animal. Huff. I crashed through the deep snowdrifts because her sweet starlight scent was already fading in the blinding storm. No tracks in the snow, no sound in the dark, no heat in the air. The blizzard was washing her footprints away completely. Have you ever chased a ghost through a frozen nightmare just to save your own mind? I was completely desperate. Without warning, the heavy static in my brain gave a sharp, painful twitch. I needed her touch. I needed her silence. I needed her soul. Moments later, I turned a sharp corner into a dead-end alley behind a broken blacksmith shop. In that moment, my heart skipped a beat. There she was. She was pressed hard against the icy brick wall, her chest heaving as she tried to blend into the shadows. As if the world narrowed, my golden eyes locked onto her pale, beautiful face. The air thickened between us as the storm trapped us together. "Stay away from me," she yelled. Her voice trembled as she held up a small, shaking fist. Truth be told, I didn't want to terrify this girl. I hated the predatory hunger clawing inside my gut, but the raging madness in my head was demanding its medicine. Because of that, I took another heavy step forward, my leather coat cracking with fresh ice. I remember a terrible winter years ago when I locked myself in a dark, silver-lined cage just to keep from ripping my own pack apart. It was a lonely, agonizing memory that still haunts my dreams. I didn't want to go back to that dark abyss. That's why I had to catch her. Before she could move, I lunged forward and pinned her firmly against the frozen bricks. The space between them burned with a strange, sudden heat. Under the weight of my stare, she didn't beg for her life or cry out. Instead, her silver eyes flashed with a quiet, unbreakable defiance that shocked my wolf to its very core. She reached up, her small fingers grabbing my thick wrists, trying to push my heavy frame away. Just like that, her bare skin brushed against my arm and a massive wave of pure, golden peace flooded my soul. The painful static in my skull died instantly. I let out a ragged sigh against her neck, soaking in her intoxicating scent of sweet rain. She was my anchor, but I could feel her heart hammering like a trapped bird against my ribs. I knew I was becoming the monster her mother warned her about, yet I couldn't let her go. Without another word, I lifted her off her feet, wrapping my heavy fur cloak around her shivering body. She kicked and screamed, but I held her tight against my chest. What followed was a silent, brutal march back to my giant warhorse, where her destiny would be chained to mine through the frozen mountains. Chapter 5. The Trek to the Fortress. After that, we began the brutal trek up into the jagged peaks of the Obsidian Mountains. The heavy mountain storm lashed against us, blinding my vision as my giant black stallion fought its way up the rocky, ice-covered paths. Next, the girl let out a sharp, angry snarl and tried to throw herself completely off the side of the horse. Her body moved on instinct as she wriggled against my grip, preferring the deadly 100-foot drop over my captivity. "Let me go, you brute," she screamed, her fingernails digging deep into the leather of my gloves. Soon after, I had to violently wrap my thick arm around her small waist, crushing her back against my chest to save her life. The physical contact sent another heavy jolt of blissful healing straight through my aching ribs, calming the dark beast in my soul. Still, her violent resistance spiked a terrible wave of guilt deep inside my heart. I felt her warmth. I felt her fear. I felt her rage. How can a man feel like a powerful king and a common thief at the exact same time? Despite that, I could not let her escape into the wilderness because she would freeze to death in minutes without my cloak. I remember finding a young rogue wolf frozen solid in these exact mountains when I was just a boy. That dead wolf's empty, glassy eyes taught me that these peaks show absolutely no mercy to outsiders. I refused to let this mysterious girl become another frozen corpse in the snow. That's why I gripped her even tighter, ignoring her sharp elbows hitting my ribs. Meanwhile, her sweet scent of winter starlight continued to blanket my mind, acting like a literal shield against the curse's painful whispers. No matter how hard she tried, she could not break my iron hold. And eventually, her exhausted body began to grow heavy against mine. She didn't know what scared her more, the terrifying storm around us or the strange magical heat blooming where our bodies touched. As the sky darkened into a deep, pitch-black night, her furious trembling finally slowed down into soft, rhythmic breaths of pure exhaustion. By the time the icy wind began to bite through my thick fur collar, the towering stone silhouette of my ancestral citadel finally appeared through the heavy fog, bridging our long journey to a dark and permanent destination. Chapter 6. The Mountain Cage. That night, The massive black iron gates of the Obsidian Citadel groaned open to welcome their weary alpha home. My guards bowed their heads in deep respect, but their curious eyes immediately darted to the hooded girl trapped in my arms. Instead of answering their silent questions, I walked past them down the long, dark stone hallways lined with roaring fireplaces. Eventually, I brought her to the highest tower and unlocked a luxurious, heavily fortified suite filled with soft furs and a blazing hearth. I placed her gently onto the velvet bed, stepping back so she could finally breathe. In the stillness that followed, she scrambled back against the headboard, pulling the thick blankets up to her chin like a shield. "You cannot keep me here," she whispered, her silver eyes scanning the heavy oak door. As the silence stretched between us, the true weight of my actions began to settle heavily onto my shoulders. I needed to establish order, and I needed to ensure she wouldn't run away the second I turned my back. Because of that, I let my true alpha aura leak into the room, making the very air thick and heavy with absolute dominance. "You will stay in this room where it is safe," I commanded, using the primal, magical force of my high alpha voice. But then, something impossible happened. No ordinary wolf could ever look a high alpha in the eyes and defy a direct command, yet she didn't even blink. Something inside her shifted, and she simply turned her face away from me in total, freezing silence. My alpha command shattered against her quiet will like cheap glass, leaving my wolf howling in absolute shock and wonder. Truth be told, this girl was a complete anomaly, and my dangerous secret loop was growing larger by the second. Not only that, but Silas's dying words about the hunters coming for her kept echoing viciously inside my mind. Did I just bring the most dangerous target in the realm directly into the heart of my home? Deep down, I knew the truth. There was no turning back from this choice, and our fates were now twisted together into a dangerous knot that would either save my pack or burn our entire world to ashes. Chapter 7. The Silent Cure. Voice direction. Low, dark whisper growing steady and warm. Come morning, the golden sunlight cut through the tall frosted windows of my private study. I sat at my heavy oak desk, but I wasn't looking at my pack ledgers. Instead, my eyes were fixed entirely on Lyra, as she sat quietly by the crackling fireplace. She was wrapping a soft wool blanket around her slim shoulders, her face pale but completely calm. Have you ever stared at something so beautiful that it makes your chest ache? I couldn't look away from her. In the stillness that followed, I decided to test a very dangerous thing because I needed to know exactly how her strange magic worked. I closed my eyes and deliberately let down the thick mental walls in my brain. I forced myself to remember the day the royal hunters trapped me, the smell of burning silver, the sharp bite of their dark iron chains, and the agony of their curse slashing into my soul. Immediately, the painful red haze started to creep back into my vision. A low, ugly growl rose in my throat, and my claws began to slice right through the expensive leather arms of my chair. The heavy static in my head screamed louder and louder, threatening to drop me into total madness. But then, before the dark curse could fully take over my mind, the air thickened. Lyra didn't move from her seat, yet a soft wave of winter starlight rushed across the room. Just like that, the roaring static in my skull died to a complete whisper. The physical pain vanished from my chest, leaving my lungs full of cool, clean air. As the silence stretched, I opened my eyes and looked at her in absolute awe. She wasn't even looking at me. She was just staring blankly into the bright orange flames of the hearth. Her ambient magic was naturally pacifying my fractured soul without her even trying. Because of that, I realized she wasn't just a prisoner in my castle. Truth be told, she was my literal lifeline, a living shield against the darkness that wanted to consume me. What followed was a sudden, jarring knock on my heavy chamber door. The peaceful tension broke instantly, and my wolf snapped its teeth in annoyance at the interruption. My beta Jax stepped into the room with a face as pale as death. He looked at me, then he darted his worried eyes over to Lyra. "Alpha, we have a massive problem," Jax whispered, his voice shaking with deep dread. Our border scouts just returned from the lowlands. The royal hunters found the ruined tavern, and they are already tracking your specific scent straight up the mountain path. Chapter 8. The Training Ground. Moments later, I led Lyra down into the cold, stone-walled training courtyard because I refused to leave her defenseless. The mountain wind whipped her long hair across her face, but her silver eyes remained steady and sharp. I held up 2 light wooden practice daggers, offering them to her with a serious look. "The hunters are coming, and you need to know how to strike," I told her, my voice dropping into a deep, gravelly register. Instead of taking the weapons, she simply stepped back and folded her arms across her chest with that same unbreakable defiance. Rather than acting like a weak captive, she looked at me like I was a fool. What's worse, her silent refusal made my dominant alpha instinct spark with a dangerous, sizzling frustration. I wanted to see what she could do. I wanted to peel back her layers and find out what kind of power she was hiding deep inside her bones. Without thinking, I lunged forward, a fast blur of heavy leather and raw speed. I swiped the wooden blade toward her shoulder, keeping my movements slow enough to let her react. Between one breath and the next, her body moved on instinct. She didn't try to block my heavy arm. On the other hand, she twisted her hips with impossible grace, slipping right past my grip like a ghost made of winter fog. With every step he took, I pressed her harder, sweeping my blades in a tight circle. Yet, no matter how fast I moved, Lyra outmaneuvered me using pure evasion. She was light as a feather, her feet sliding silently across the frosted cobblestones without making a single sound. In the span of a breath, I spun around and trapped her completely between my large body and the cold stone wall. The space between them burned with a sudden suffocating heat. My chest ached as our breathing mingled in the freezing air, and the scent of her starlight magic filled my senses until my brain went blissfully numb. "Tell me who you are," I murmured, my face inches from hers as my golden eyes locked onto her silver gaze. Before either could speak, a strange, dark shadow flickered across the high roof of the armory. While the forest held its breath, my wolf bared its fangs because a foul, unnatural scent suddenly cut through the crisp mountain air. It smelled like poisoned silver and old blood. A beat later, a black-cloaked figure dropped from the stone rafters into the courtyard, a wicked crossbow leveled directly at Lyra's chest. Chapter 9. The Target. Before she could move, my instincts surged with a pure, white-hot protective rage. I threw my large body directly in front of Lyra as the sharp hiss of a crossbow bolt sliced through the air. The heavy metal bolt slammed hard into my armored shoulder, shattering against the thick leather and drawing a line of dark red blood. A loud growl rose in my throat, a terrifying sound that shook the very foundations of the courtyard. Without another word, I charged across the snow like a monster unleashed. The royal hunter scout tried to reload his weapon, but I was already upon him. I slammed my fist into his chest, breaking his ribs with a loud crack because he dared to threaten my anchor. What followed was a short, brutal struggle as I ripped the weapon from his hands and threw him violently against the stone floor. He choked on his own blood, his dark eyes wide with terror as my claws extended toward his throat. "Who sent you?" I roared, my alpha voice echoing off the high fortress walls. The scout let out an ugly, gurgling laugh as his life began to slip away. "You think you can hide her, Alpha? You think she belongs to you?" As the truth unraveled, I plunged my claws deep into his chest, ending his miserable life before he could utter another word. I stood over his bloody corpse, my chest heaving as the cold wind whipped my hair. But then, I noticed a strange, heavy brass compass sliding out of the dead hunter's leather pouch. I knelt down and picked it up, my hands stained with fresh blood. Moments later, my heart skipped a beat, and my entire world tilted in absolute horror. The magical silver needle inside the compass wasn't pointing north. In fact, it wasn't even pointing toward my specific alpha scent or my bloodline. The glowing needle was locked directly onto Lyra as she stood trembling by the castle wall. Deep down, I knew the truth, and the terrifying realization hit my soul like a physical blow. The royal hunters weren't tracking my madness, and they weren't searching for a rogue alpha. They were tracking her raw, ancient magic. I didn't bring a cure into my home. I had brought the crown's ultimate target, and the entire army of the monarchy was already marching to tear her away from me. Chapter 10. The explosive truth, voice direction, harsh, breathing heavily, tone dripping with dark anger. I slammed the bloody brass compass onto my desk, the heavy metal clattering against the wood like a death bell. Truth be told, I was completely terrified. The magical silver needle inside the cracked glass was still locked tightly onto the wooden door where Lyra was sleeping. I wiped the dead hunter's dark blood onto my leather pants because my hands were shaking with a wild, uncontrollable anger. Have you ever realized that the person you locked up to save your own life is actually the most dangerous target in the whole world? It changes everything inside your head. Moments later, Lyra walked into the warm study, her wide silver eyes looking straight at the fresh blood on my fingers. The air thickened between us as I stepped close to her, my large, scarred shadow completely blocking out the bright orange light from the crackling fireplace. "They aren't looking for me, Lyra," I growled, my voice dropping into a deep, threatening register. "They are tracking you. This magical compass is tuned directly to your heartbeat, your power, and your soul. What are you hiding from me?" Instead of crying or running away, she stood tall and glared right back at me with that same stubborn look. The space between them burned with a sudden, heavy heat. "I didn't ask to be brought to your scary castle," she shouted, her voice trembling with a fierce, hot emotion. "I was surviving just fine in the dirt before you dragged me into your stupid war." I remember when my father told me about the old wars, about how one single secret could destroy a whole kingdom in a single day. He told me that some secrets are just too heavy for one person to carry alone. Looking at this tiny girl, I realized she was carrying a massive mountain on her back. I wanted to help her, but my stubborn alpha pride made me shout at her instead. "Speak to me," I roared, my long fangs slipping out past my lips. She pressed her back against the wall, but her silver eyes never lost their fire. "You want the truth? You couldn't handle the truth even if I screamed it." Without warning, our angry words seemed to spark something dangerous in the room. Between them, something cracked. I took one more aggressive step forward to show my alpha dominance, but Lyra did not back down. Her instincts surged because she was tired of being hunted, tired of running, and tired of being locked in a cage. She stomped her small leather boot onto the stone floor, and a massive wave of raw, white-hot energy exploded from her body. Boom! The heavy stone floorboards underneath our feet split completely apart, throwing deep, jagged cracks across the expensive rug. In that moment, the sudden explosion of her power hit my chest like a runaway wagon. What's worse, the massive shockwave of her magic completely broke my mental walls, and my dark curse woke up with a terrifying, violent roar. The ancient hunter's brand on my chest burned like liquid fire. Deep, painful static slammed into my brain, wiping out my vision until everything went completely black. Groan. I fell to my knees, my hands clawing at my head as the heavy madness started to rip my sanity apart, leaving me totally helpless on the shattered floor. Chapter 11. The Starlight Wolf. Between one breath and the next, I was completely lost in the dark, scary hallways of my own madness. I couldn't feel my arms, I couldn't feel my legs, and I couldn't even breathe because the heavy poison of the curse was choking my heart. The phantom hunters were tearing at my soul with their sharp iron hooks. Have you ever felt your own soul breaking into tiny pieces while you are still alive? It is a terrifying thing. I was ready to die right there on the floor because the pain was just too much for a single man to take. But then, a soft, cool touch pressed against my burning forehead. As if pulled by a string, my heavy eyelids fluttered open, and my golden eyes witnessed something absolutely impossible. The dark study was gone, replaced by a beautiful, blinding white light that smelled like fresh winter rain and sweet starlight. The moment their eyes locked, my jaw dropped in total shock. Lyra wasn't a human girl anymore, and she wasn't just a regular rogue shifter. Instead, she was standing over me in the form of a magnificent spectral white wolf. Her silver-tipped fur was glowing like the full moon, and her body was surrounded by beautiful glowing threads of starlight magic. Her body moved on instinct as her paws stepped softly across my chest, her silver eyes looking down at me with a deep, ancient love. As the bond pulsed, I watched her mouth move, weaving the beautiful light threads together like a magical loom. She was literally sewing the broken pieces of my mind back together with her own hands. Gasp. The painful static in my brain stopped instantly, leaving behind a beautiful deep silence that I hadn't felt in 10 long years. Deep down she knew the truth, and now, I knew it too. She was a moonweaver. The last of the sacred, hunted legends that my mother used to tell me about in bedtime stories. They were the special wolves who could change fate itself, the ones the royal family murdered because they were too powerful to control. Just like that, everything changed inside my heart. My selfish goal of using her as a temporary cure vanished into the wind. Looking at her magnificent glowing form, a powerful wave of absolute devotion slammed into my chest. She was a sacred queen, a precious gift from the moon, and she had risked her own life to save a broken monster like me. Truth be told, I didn't care about my own sanity anymore. I didn't care about my castle or my gold. From this second on, my only goal in life was to protect her, to fight for her, and to burn the entire royal monarchy to the ground before I ever let them touch a single hair on her beautiful white fur. Soon after, the bright white light began to fade back into the shadows of the room. Lyra let out a soft, tired sigh and collapsed onto my chest, her spectral wolf form melting away, until she was just a fragile, exhausted girl in my arms. I wrapped my large arms around her, holding her close to my beating heart because I never wanted to lose this feeling of pure connection. "You saved me," I murmured, my voice trembling with a soft, breathy tenderness. "You showed me your true self." She rested her heavy head against my shoulder, her breath hot against my neck. "You cannot tell anyone, Kaylin," she whispered, her voice smaller than a mouse. "If they find out what I am, they will kill us all." I kissed the top of her head, my heart swelling with an intense protective passion. More importantly, I knew the royal hunters were already close to our gates, which meant I had to prepare my pack for the biggest, bloodiest war our mountains had ever seen. Chapter 12. The War Council. That night, the big stone war room was filled with the angry shouts of my top generals. A massive fire roared in the hearth, throwing long, scary shadows across the giant wooden map on the table. I stood at the head of the table, my hands flat against the wood, my face cold and hard as stone. My beta, Jax, slammed his fist down because he was completely terrified of my new orders. "This is completely insane, Alpha," Jax yelled, his eyes flashing a dangerous yellow. "You want us to lock the gates and fight the entire royal army? We are a small pack. We have survived for years by hiding in these foggy mountains. If we fight the king's hunters, they will slaughter every woman and child in this citadel." On the other hand, I didn't care about our old rules anymore. In the echo of his voice, I let out a low, rumbling growl that made every single man in the room shut his mouth instantly. The tension broke like a snapped branch, and the air became suffocatingly thick with my heavy alpha command. "We are not hiding anymore, Jax," I said, my voice dropping into a dark, final tone. "I want the wall defenses doubled by midnight. I want every silver-tipped arrow brought up from the armory. If a single hunter steps onto our paths, I want them torn to pieces." A beat later, my oldest general, a scarred gray wolf named Torin, stepped forward. He looked at me with deep suspicion because he knew I was keeping a massive secret from them. "Why are we risking our lives for a single strange girl from the border town?" Torin asked, his voice rough like gravel. "Is she worth the destruction of our entire home?" As the silence roared, I looked out the tall window at the dark mountains. I remember a story about an ancient alpha who betrayed his own mate to save his lands, and how his pack turned to dust because they lost their honor. I refused to be a coward. I knew my generals thought the madness had finally taken my brain, but I was actually more sane than I had ever been in my entire life. Because of that, I looked Torin straight in the eyes and made my final choice. She is worth more than this entire kingdom, I stated, my tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. If you do not want to fight by my side, you can leave the fortress right now. But I am protecting her until my very last breath. What followed was a tense, freezing silence, as my generals realized I would gladly choose this mysterious girl over the safety of our pack's anonymity. They didn't know about her white fur, and they didn't know about her starlight magic, yet they had to follow my lead because I was their alpha. They slowly bowed their heads, one by one, accepting their dark fate. As they marched out of the room to prepare for the bloody siege, I gripped the edges of the wooden table, knowing that the heavy storm of war was about to break over our heads, testing our explosive bond to the absolute limit. Chapter 13, The Gift of Choice. Voice direction, soft but intense whisper, heavy emotional weight. I held the cold, heavy iron key to her prison in my palm, ready to hand her my own death sentence. Truth be told, my heart was pounding against my ribs like a wild animal trapped in a wooden box. I led Lyra down into the darkest, deepest stone catacombs beneath my fortress because I needed to show her the ugly truth of my past. The air down here was freezing, smelling of ancient dust, damp stone and old iron. Shadows danced between them as our single torch flickered against the damp walls. Have you ever laid your entire soul bare to the one person who could easily destroy you? It makes you feel completely naked. Eventually, we stopped in front of a heavy iron cell where two rusty, jagged shackles hung from the ceiling. Without another word, I pointed to the dark red stains on the floorboards below the cuffs. The royal hunters kept me here for 3 whole months, I muttered, my voice dropping into a rough, low pitch. They used these special anti-magic chains to stop my wolf from breaking out. And that is how they carved that awful curse into my chest. In that moment, Lyra's breath caught in her throat, and her wide, silver eyes filled with a soft, glowing sadness. I remember a young pup from my pack who got caught in a silver bear trap years ago, and how he cried out for mercy in the dark. I felt that exact same crushing helplessness when the hunters tortured me. I didn't want to be a tyrant like the king. That's why I took her small hand, placed the heavy iron key into her palm, and closed her fingers over it. This key opens the secret back gate of the mountain pass, I whispered, my chest aching as I looked at her. You are completely free to leave my castle, Lyra, because I refuse to be your captor any longer. As the silence stretched, my thoughts spun in a dizzy circle. I was giving away my only cure, my only anchor, and my only chance at sanity. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hide the shock on her beautiful face. The space between them burned with a strange, sudden heat as she stared down at the rusted iron key. Would she run away from the monster who kidnapped her? Or would she stay with the man who wanted to protect her? Instead of running toward the stairs, she took a slow step forward and pressed her small hand right against my scarred chest. As the bond pulsed, a massive wave of pure, golden warmth flooded through my skin, chasing away every single bit of my lingering fear. I am not running anymore, Kaelin, she whispered, her voice trembling but full of an iron strength. And just like that, everything changed inside my frozen heart. The moment their eyes locked, my world narrowed down to her beautiful smile. But then, before I could even wrap my arms around her waist, a loud, terrifying noise ripped through the deep stone tunnels. Barsh! The loud metallic blare of the castle alarm horns erupted from the surface, bridging our short moment of peace to a sudden nightmare of blood and fire. Chapter 14, The Vanguard Assault. Moments later, I was racing down to the lower courtyard with 50 of my strongest warrior wolves. The heavy wooden gates were already splintering apart under the massive blows of the royal hunters' iron battering rams. The freezing mountain air was thick with the smell of burning wood, sulfur, and crisp snow. Snarl. My wolf was clawing at the inside of my skin, screaming for a chance to tear our enemies to shreds. Without thinking, I let out a terrifying alpha roar and shifted into my giant, midnight black wolf form. My bones cracked and stretched in a fast, painful burst of pure muscle. What followed was a total explosion of raw, chaotic violence as the heavy gates finally gave way. The elite royal hunters flooded into the courtyard, their dark iron armor gleaming under the stormy sky. In the span of a breath, I lunged forward, a fast blur of fur and fury. I slammed my heavy paws into the first hunter's chest, throwing him backward into the deep snowdrifts. My sharp fangs tore right through his leather throat armor because he dared to bring his weapons into my sacred home. Not only that, but my warriors charged right behind me, their claws flashing in the dark as they fought to defend our families. To make things worse, the clever hunters were completely prepared for our counterattack. Without warning, 3 large metal canisters flew over the stone walls, exploding into a thick, glowing green gas that smelled like rotten eggs and sour copper. Hiss! The toxic smoke filled my lungs, and a terrible, paralyzing pain shot straight through my muscles. My large wolf body grew heavy, and my legs buckled beneath me because the gas was a special potion made to suppress our shifting abilities. At the same time, the dark curse in my brain woke up from the poison, filling my vision with that awful, blinding red haze. I screamed inside my own mind as the phantom voices started to mock me again. Still, I forced my heavy body to stand up, snapping my jaws fiercely at the hunters closing in around me. I remember an old lone wolf who fought off an entire pack of coyotes by himself just to save his pups. That memory gave me a sudden surge of raw willpower. I threw my heavy shoulder into a hunter, crushing his skull against the stone well. Yet my heavy movements were just too slow from the green gas. A beat later, a sharp, silver-tipped dart shot out from the fog and slammed hard into my bare shoulder. Ah! The dark hunter poison burned through my veins like boiling oil, tearing my mind apart faster than ever before. I managed to slash my heavy claws across the last hunter's face, forcing the remaining vanguard to retreat back into the foggy woods. As the chaotic battle finally ended, I stumbled blindly back toward the castle doors, my vision fading into darkness as the deadly poison began to choke my soul. Chapter 15. The Lethal Choice. Come morning, I was lying flat on my back in my private chambers, my chest heaving as the dark black veins of the poison crawled up my neck. The air in the room felt suffocatingly hot, smelling of sweat, copper, and medicinal herbs. My beta, Jax, was standing over me with a look of total despair because none of our pack healing salves were working against the hunter's toxin. The painful static in my head was roaring like a waterfall, making me grind my teeth until they bled. Soon after, the heavy wooden door flew open, and Lyra rushed to my bedside. With a single glance, she saw the black veins on my skin, and her beautiful face went completely white. "Get everyone out of this room right now," she commanded, her silver eyes flashing with a sudden regal authority that made Jax back away instantly. In the quiet that followed, she knelt beside my bed and placed her cool hands onto my burning cheeks. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, her starlight magic tried to weave my mind back together, but the dark poison kept ripping her beautiful threads apart. Her chest ached as she realized her regular touch wasn't strong enough to save me this time. "There is only one way to purge this poison and permanently break your curse, Kaelin," she whispered, her voice trembling with a deep, heavy fear. "I have to perform the ancient Moonweaver ritual under the full moon tonight. But that massive explosion of magic will act like a literal flare, showing every hunter in the realm exactly where I am." Because of that, my heart skipped a beat, and a powerful wave of pure terror slammed into my gut. I grabbed her small wrists with my weak, shaking fingers, my golden eyes wide with a desperate anger. Have you ever been asked to trade the life of the person you love just to save your own miserable skin? I refuse to be that kind of a coward. "No, I forbid it, Lyra," I choked out, a low, ragged cough ripping from my throat. "I would rather die mad in these chains than see you captured by the king." On the other hand, she completely ignored my angry alpha command, her small chin lifting with that same unbreakable defiance. Deep down, she knew the truth, and she wasn't going to let me die. As if fate demanded it, She stood up from the bed and began gathering her magical silver threads. Her silver eyes locked onto the rising moon outside the tall frosted window. "You don't have a choice, Alpha," she stated softly, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "I am saving your life tonight, even if I have to burn this entire kingdom to the ground to do it." What followed was a heavy, terrifying silence as I lay completely helpless on the bed, watching her prepare for the dangerous ritual that would either cure my madness or bring the entire royal army down upon our heads. Chapter 16. The Fallen Citadel. Voice direction: low, gravelly tone, heavy breathing, frantic pacing. The sky didn't rain water. It rained fire and screaming wolves. To make things worse, the Lord Commander's main army breached the front gates of the Obsidian Peaks before the full moon could even hit its highest point. Boom! Exploding arrows smashed into our stone towers, sending a shower of burning rocks down into the crowded courtyard. I forced my heavy, poisoned body out of the bed because my people were dying in the thick smoke. My skin felt like it was melting, and the black veins on my neck were throbbing with a terrible, pulsing heat. Have you ever had to fight for your life when your own body feels like an enemy weapon? It is pure torture. Ragged groan. Ah. Without thinking, I ran out into the blazing courtyard and shifted into my midnight black wolf. Crack, crack, snap. My bones broke and stretched in the dark, but it wasn't a clean shift this time because the hunter's poison was clogging my veins. The transition was an agonizing nightmare of tearing muscles and screaming blood. I stood unsteadily on my paws, my vision swimming in a blinding red haze as the dark curse started to play tricks on my mind. I saw phantom hunters laughing in the bright fire, and I heard the ghostly screams of my past victims echoing in the wind. Still, I bared my blood-stained fangs and lunged straight at the nearest enemy. What followed was a desperate, sloppy slaughter. I bit through a hunter's metal shield, my teeth cracking against the iron, as his warm blood sprayed across my face. Moments later, 3 elite guards surrounded me, throwing heavy silver nets over my back. The burning silver metal bit into my flesh like 1,000 hungry wasps. I thrashed and growled, trying to tear the heavy ropes with my claws, but my strength was completely gone from the toxic gas. As the sky darkened with thick black smoke, I saw my warriors falling one by one into the crimson snow. Before I could move, a heavy iron mace slammed right into the side of my head. Crack! My world tilted instantly. I crashed into the freezing dirt, my giant wolf form melting away until I was just a broken, naked man shivering in the snow. Instead of killing me, the hunters kicked me in the ribs and dragged heavy anti-magic chains across my arms. Clang. The dark iron cuffs locked around my wrists with a heavy final sound. In that moment, the thick iron completely cut off the faint, warm thread of Lyra's starlight magic from my soul. The painful static in my head exploded into a roaring thunderstorm, completely blinding my eyes as they dragged my bleeding body toward the center of the burning courtyard. By the time they threw me against the stone well, I could hear a dark, heavy pair of boots crunching through the snow toward me, bridging my physical defeat to an even more terrifying psychological nightmare. Chapter 17. The Courtyard Torture. Voice direction: painful, raspy delivery, spitting words with pure hatred. The cold bite of iron was nothing compared to the freezing smirk on the Lord Commander's face. Next, he grabbed my bloody hair and pulled my head back so I had to look into his cruel, dark eyes. The courtyard smelled of copper blood, wet fur, and the bitter stink of burning tapestries. I spat a mouthful of red blood right onto his polished silver chest armor because I refused to show him any fear. "Where is the Moonweaver, Kaelin?" the commander whispered, his voice smooth and evil like a sliding snake. "Tell me where she is hiding, and I will end your pathetic life quickly." On the other hand, I kept my mouth tightly shut, clamping my teeth together until they creaked. I remember a brave warrior from my pack named Caleb, who got captured by a rogue group years ago. He took 20 lashes and never said a single word to protect our hidden women. That story of true loyalty was the only thing keeping my spirit alive right now. He wanted my submission, he wanted my secrets, and he wanted my queen. In fact, he didn't just want Lyra. He wanted to use her fate-weaving magic to find the secret royal map Silas had stolen from them. The same map that could unlock the king's darkest secrets and show my missing past. But I would rather let them peel the skin from my bones than give them a single clue about my beautiful white wolf. To make things worse, the commander let out a dark, low laugh and nodded to his torturers. What followed was an agonizing eternity of pure physical pain. They whipped my back with silver-tipped cords, each strike tearing my flesh away and burning my muscles like hot coals. Snap, slash. I screamed into the freezing night, my voice echoing off the burning walls of my home. Still, I didn't say her name. I took the abuse because my love for her was an unbreakable shield. Soon after, the commander grew tired of the bloody game and stepped back, wiping his hands with a white silk cloth. Beneath the moonlight, his expression shifted into a terrifying, confident grin that made my stomach turn completely upside down. "You think you are being a hero, Alpha?" he mocked, pulling a small, glowing crystal device out of his black leather pouch. "We don't need your broken tongue. This tracking crystal is already locked onto her ancient magic." Just like that, everything changed inside my bleeding chest. With a single glance at the pulsing red light of the crystal, my heart skipped a beat. The dark needle was pointing straight up toward the high, secret mountain pass behind the citadel. I didn't know what scared me more, the physical agony of my body, or the terrifying realization that my beautiful anchor hadn't run away. She was up there right now, starting the dangerous ritual to save my life. As the truth unraveled, the commander turned to his elite assassins and pointed his silver blade up the snowy trail, leaving me chained to the stone well as they marched to hunt down my soul. That night, the heavy iron chains grew heavier around my bleeding wrists, dragging my mind down into a deep, inescapable abyss, where hope went completely dark. Chapter 18. The Abyss of Madness. Voice direction, dropping into complete insanity, breathless, chaotic growling. The quiet in my head didn't just disappear, it died with a screaming roar. Eventually, the extreme physical distance between me and Lyra, combined with the heavy anti-magic iron chains, completely severed our beautiful bond. The painful red static slammed back into my skull with the force of a falling mountain. Desperate whisper. "No. Lyra. Please." I clawed my fingernails into the frozen cobblestones, tearing my own skin away because the pressure in my brain was about to blow my head apart. Because of that, the dark curse fully reclaimed my mind, wiping away my logic, my thoughts, and my control. Have you ever felt the exact second your humanity rips away from your soul? It feels like drowning in a pool of boiling oil. I started to hallucinate about my stolen past again, seeing the faceless hunters who stole my memories when I was just a young boy, locking away the secrets of my bloodline. I realized my whole life was a lie. I had failed my pack, I had failed my mother's memory, and I had failed the white wolf. As the silence roared in my ears, I let out a loud, terrifying sound that didn't sound like a man or a wolf. It was a mindless, primal shriek of pure agony. As a result, my broken body began to thrash against the stone well, the heavy iron chains rattling loudly in the dark courtyard. Clang, clang, clang. The dark-veined poison from the dart was mixing with the curse, turning my blood into pure acid. So I stopped trying to fight the monster inside my chest. I let the red haze take the steering wheel completely because it was the only way to stop the suffocating pain. I wanted to become a beast. I wanted to forget the beautiful silver eyes of the girl I had dragged into this burning hell. Deep down, my soul knew the truth. I was just a dangerous, toxic monster who destroyed every single thing he touched. My dark presence had brought the royal army to my pack, and my selfish needs had put a target on the last sacred moonweaver. Without another word, my human mind snapped into a million tiny pieces. Grrrl. I stopped thinking. I stopped feeling. Instead of an alpha king, I became a wild, mindless animal trapped in a cage of flesh and iron. No thoughts, no memories, no humanity. I chewed on my own lips until the salty taste of blood filled my mouth, my yellow eyes rolling back into my head as the heavy darkness swallowed my soul whole. I was completely lost in the deep, black abyss of the curse, totally unaware that high up on the snowy mountain peak, a beautiful beam of pure white moonlight was about to strike the earth, bridging my darkest night of the soul to a shocking reawakening of fate. Chapter 19. The Thread of Light. Voice direction ragged, breathless gasping, suddenly shifting to a tone of pure shock. My mind was a black ocean of absolute nothingness. I was completely dead inside my own skull, floating in a dark pit where the red static had finally burned away my last human thought. Groan. The heavy anti-magic chains held my bleeding body pinned tight against the freezing stone well in the center of the ruined courtyard. Have you ever felt a single thread of light pull you back from a deep room where you were completely dead? It leaves you totally breathless. Without warning, a sudden flash of bright, pure energy slammed directly into my frozen heart. As the bond pulsed, I felt a violent magical tug deep inside my chest that completely broke through the heavy darkness of the curse. In that moment, my golden eyes snapped wide open, and my broken mind became instantly clear because Lyra had started her sacred magic ritual high up on the mountain peak. Beneath the moonlight, the heavy black storm clouds above the citadel suddenly split completely apart. What followed was a magnificent, blinding beam of pure white light that pierced the sky like a silver spear, hitting the snowy summit far above us. Just like that, everything changed inside my bleeding body. I could actually feel the beautiful starlight threads of her magic wrapping tightly around my fractured soul, even from miles away. Truth be told, I realized a beautiful thing that completely shattered my old beliefs about myself. I wasn't just a temporary monster using her for a quick cure. Instead, our souls were permanently locked together into an unbreakable circle. I was truly worthy of being anchored by her light because she was choosing to risk her entire life to save me right now. Because of that, a powerful surge of raw, godlike hope exploded through my veins, chasing away the toxic hunter poison in a single second. Moments later, I heard the Lord Commander let out a sharp, angry shout across the burning courtyard as he looked up at the glowing silver sky. "March up the mountain right now," the commander roared, his voice shaking with a sudden panic. "Find the Moonweaver and cut off her head before she destroys us all." Which meant I had only a few minutes to break my chains and stop his elite army. As the silence roared around me, my wolf pushed forward against my ribcage with a terrifying, protective fury. The royal hunters thought they had completely broken my spirit, but they had actually just unleashed a desperate king who had everything to fight for. Chapter 20. The Shattered Iron. Voice direction. Deep gravelly growl building into a powerful earth-shaking roar. In the stillness that followed, I gripped the cold anti-magic iron chains with my bare, bloody hands. The dark metal hissed against my skin, trying to drain my remaining power, but I didn't care about the pain anymore. I remember an old story about my ancestral grandfather, who lifted a burning wooden cabin with his bare shoulders just to save his trapped mate. That ancient blood was screaming inside my bones right now because my beautiful white wolf needed me to be strong. Without thinking, I let out a terrifying, deep alpha roar that shook the very foundations of the burning fortress. What followed was an impossible feat of raw willpower and ancient alpha magic. I didn't care about the silver burning my skin. I didn't care about the bones snapping in my wrists. I didn't care about the pain tearing my flesh apart. I pulled against the stone well with every single bit of my soul, because my devotion to Lyra was 1,000,000 times stronger than their dark iron. Crack. Boom. Just like that, the heavy iron links shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces, exploding across the crimson snow like cheap glass beads. Between one breath and the next, the sudden release of my power knocked 3 nearby hunters flat onto their backs. Moments later, my beta, Jax, crawled out from underneath a burning wooden beam, his yellow eyes wide with a total jaw-dropping shock. At the same time, 20 of my surviving warrior wolves staggered out from the thick black smoke, their clubs and broken blades raised in the dark air. "Alpha!" Jax choked out, wiping the dark red blood from his scarred face. You broke the dark iron chains. The madness is completely gone. Gather every single weapon left in the armory, I commanded, my voice dropping into a dark, hyper-focused tone. The hunters are marching up the secret path to murder our queen, and I am going to paint this mountain with their blood. Because of that, my warriors let out a fierce, bloodthirsty shout that echoed off the high, rocky peaks. We didn't have a complicated plan, and we didn't have a giant army, but we had a pack of furious wolves fighting for their honor. Soon after, I led my men straight toward the hidden mountain trail, moving like a pack of starving ghosts through the thick white fog. Chapter 21, The Summit Race. Voice direction. Fast-paced, high adrenaline switching to pure horror at the end. With every step I took, the freezing mountain wind whipped against my raw, bleeding back. I was running up the icy trail like a fast bullet shot from a gun because my heart was slamming against my ribs in pure terror. Meanwhile, my warriors ran right behind me in a tight line, their heavy paws crunching loudly through the deep snowdrifts. We could smell the foul stink of the royal hunters just ahead of us, their dark metal armor clinking in the cold night air. A beat later, we caught up to the rear guard of the enemy army in a narrow, rocky pass. Without another word, I lunged forward into the dark, a fast blur of fur and fury. I didn't even slow down to shift into a wolf because my human hands were already lethal weapons. I grabbed the first hunter by his throat and threw him violently over the 100-foot cliffside, his terrifying screams dying into the foggy abyss below. What followed was a short, brutal slaughter in the deep snow. I was a tactical, lethal force of nature, no longer blind with a heavy madness, but fighting with a perfect, terrifying clarity because her starlight bond was guiding my every move. I snapped a silver blade with my bare hands and drove the sharp point straight through a captain's chest armor. Not only that, but Jax and Torin tore through the remaining guards like a pair of hungry demons, clearing our path in a matter of seconds. To make things worse, the glowing white light at the top of the mountain began to flicker and shake violently. As the sky darkened into a deep purple color, a massive shockwave of raw magic blasted down from the summit clearing, knocking the tall pine trees flat against the ground. Before I could move, a terrible sense of impending doom slammed straight into my gut. Her soul answered my silent prayer, but her magical connection felt incredibly weak, like a candle flame about to be blown out by a harsh winter wind. By the time I burst through the final thick tree line into the wide summit clearing, my entire world tilted in absolute horror. The dangerous ritual was completely finished, and Lyra was lying flat on the frozen ground in her magnificent white wolf form, her glowing silver fur covered in dirt. Under the weight of his stare, the Lord Commander stood right over her trembling body, a massive silver broadsword raised high above his head, ready to drive the cold blade straight into her exposed back. Chapter 22, The Summit Showdown. Voice direction, fast-paced high adrenaline switching to absolute explosive power. I didn't just run. I flew across the crimson snow like a fast bullet made of pure, desperate rage. Before she could move, the Lord Commander brought his heavy silver broadsword down toward her neck. Clang! Without thinking, I lunged forward and caught the sharp silver edge with my bare, bloody hands because I would rather let my fingers be sliced to the bone than see her harmed. No thoughts of fear, no whispers of madness, and no shadows of doubt could stop me now. Vicious, echoing snarl. Get away from my mate. What followed was a brutal, bone-crushing showdown in the freezing mountain clearing. The Lord Commander gasped in total shock as I twisted his heavy sword right out of his grip, throwing the weapon into the dark abyss below. But then, the evil man pulled a glowing anti-magic dagger from his black leather belt. Moments later, he drove the poisoned blade straight into my ribs, laughing loudly as the cold metal bit deep into my skin. In the span of a breath, my entire world tilted completely upside down. I fell backward into the deep snowdrifts, my lungs gasping for air as the fresh hunter toxin tried to claw its way back into my chest. Yet, the dangerous ritual was already finished. Suddenly, a massive shockwave of blinding starlight exploded from the center of the clearing, knocking the remaining royal guards flat onto their backs. As if fate demanded it, Lyra pressed forward in her magnificent white wolf form. Her glowing silver fur lit up the entire mountain peak like a second sun under the dark, stormy sky. The moment their eyes locked, I felt her ancient power rush through our magical bond, instantly burning away the fresh poison in my veins. In fact, I didn't feel like a weak, broken monster anymore because her beautiful soul was completely anchoring mine. Instead of running away from the danger, she stood right beside me as a true, proud equal. Together, we moved like a single shadow of pure destruction against our enemies. I tackled the commander into the freezing snow, my sharp claws ripping through his dark iron breastplate while her white wolf jaws snapped firmly around his throat. Crunch. Just like that, his evil eyes rolled back into his head, and his lifeless body went completely limp in the dirt. Soon after, the surviving hunters dropped their heavy weapons and fled into the dark forest like terrified rabbits. The heavy battle was finally over, but my heart was still slamming against my chest as I stared at the sacred creature standing before me. In the stillness that followed, the burning smoke began to clear from the high summit, bridging our violent struggle to a moment of pure, jaw-dropping reverence. Chapter 23, The Kneeling Pack. In the quiet that followed, the freezing mountain wind carried the heavy smell of old copper and burnt silver away into the valley. I stood shaking in the crimson snow, my human body covered in deep cuts and dark hunter blood. Huff. My lungs ached, my skin burned, and my muscles trembled from the extreme exhaustion. Yet, the terrible static in my head was completely gone, replaced by a beautiful, deep silence that made me want to weep with joy. With a single glance, I looked across the clearing at the magnificent white wolf. Her glowing silver fur was reflecting the bright moonlight, making her look like a sacred goddess who had dropped straight out of the sky. Have you ever seen something so beautiful that it makes you fall straight to your knees? I couldn't even speak. As the silence stretched, my beta, Jax, and the surviving warriors stepped out from the dark tree line. Their jaws dropped in total freezing shock because they had never seen a true moonweaver in their entire lives. They didn't see a dangerous rogue, and they didn't see a strange girl anymore. Instead, they saw the living legend that was supposed to be completely extinct. Truth be told, my old alpha pride completely vanished into the freezing wind because I finally understood the true meaning of power. I didn't want to be a ruthless tyrant who ruled through fear, dominance, and isolation anymore. I moved toward her on instinct. Before either could speak, I fell heavily onto my knees in the cold snow, lowering my head and baring my neck to her in absolute submission and devotion. As if pulled by a string, Jax and every single warrior behind him dropped to their knees too, their heads bowed low to the ground in deep reverence. We were not just protecting a captive anymore. We were pleading our allegiance to our true queen. Moments later, her beautiful white wolf form began to soften and change, melting away into the dark night air like white fog. Lyra stood before me as a fragile, shivering girl, her silver eyes shining with a soft, happy warmth. She walked over and wrapped her small arms tightly around my neck, her hot tears soaking into my scarred shoulder. "Your mind is finally your own, Kaelin," she whispered, her voice trembling with a pure, emotional relief. I held her close to my beating heart because her touch was the only anchor I would ever need in this world. My dark curse was broken forever, and my missing past memories were finally starting to flood back into my brain, bridging our long night of terror to a beautiful new dawn for our entire pack. Chapter 24. The New Dawn. Come morning, the bright summer sun was shining warmly down on the high stone walls of the Obsidian Citadel. Weeks had passed since the bloody battle on the mountain peak, and our ancestral home was finally being rebuilt from the ashes. The fresh air smelled of pine sap, wet clay, and sweet morning dew. I stood by the tall glass window of my private study, a soft smile resting on my face. Eventually, I looked down into the bustling courtyard below, watching my people work together in total peace. My mind was completely quiet, with absolutely no red static or painful whispers left in my brain. I remember a time when I thought I was just a dangerous monster who was born to destroy everything he touched. That dark misbelief was completely dead because true devotion had saved my fractured soul. More importantly, we had finally used Silas's secret royal map to locate and destroy the hunters' hidden prisons across the realm. We freed hundreds of captured wolves, we rebuilt our broken stone towers, and we reclaimed our forgotten stolen past. Our pack was now stronger than it had ever been because we were finally unified. My old memories had fully returned too, filling the empty spaces in my heart with the love of my family. And just like that, everything changed when Lyra walked into the courtyard. She wasn't hiding her identity in a dark hood anymore, and she wasn't trying to erase her footprints in the dirt. Instead, she walked openly under the bright sunlight, her beautiful silver eyes shining with a confident, proud light as she laughed with the young pups of the pack. The people didn't look at her with fear or suspicion. They looked at her with an absolute fierce reverence. Deep down, I knew the truth. I had spent my whole life trying to run away from my own darkness, never realizing she was the light I needed to guide me home. She was my mate, my equal, and my absolute salvation. Without thinking, I left my desk and walked down the grand stone stairs to join her. As the wind shifted, she turned her head and caught my eye, a beautiful heat blooming beneath my skin as she smiled at me. I walked right up to her and took her hand, locking our fingers together under the warm sun. The core emotional question was finally answered. I wasn't a monster. I was a king who had found his anchor, and together, we were ready to rule our new world with an absolute, fierce love that would never fade. The end.